It's a pleasure to be here, and it's a pleasure to launch this book. I think only those who are closely involved in the publication of a book like this know how hectic, how difficult, how trying it has been, and how bleary-eyed some of the people are that I see in front of me because of the work that they have put in. So, and it's very nice to have you here in this audience at this time of the day in this situation. Uh, Sudeep has already been introduced, but I don't think any introduction can do justice to Sudeep. I thought of today in the morning, I jotted down, I've known Sudeep for a long time now. We've been friends for I don't know how many years now. But I tried to jot down a few adjectives, not too many, just a few. And so I came up with these: versatile, indefatigable, and cosmopolitan. I could have actually added many others, but I thought that they perhaps will give you a range, and you've already heard what he has done.
He's terribly biased. Don't believe anything he says.
Okay, all right. And in addition to what has been said, he's of course he has been introduced as a poet. He's edited a number of things. This is not the first anthology he has done. He's done several. Would you believe it? When he was in Dhaka for a number of years, he takes lovely photographs, and he has lovely photographs of Dhaka. Really, really wonderful photographs of Dhaka, which he has taken. He has an eye, in other words, which looks for the quotidian from a very unusual angle. He's excellent in designing. The first time I went to his house, then getting to know him, he designs everything, and he's fastidious. That should have been another adjective I should have added to what I've said. Very fastidious in production. He is, of course, first of all, a poet. Completely focused on that, I think. Completely focused in everything that he does. He lives and breathes poetry, and he does it with a lot of discipline also, I should add. In a book which he gave to me, which I was looking forward to getting a copy of, Fractals, which is another of his books which came out earlier this year. He has a quotation from Browning, quotation all of us know: a man's reach should exceed his grasp, or what's heaven's for. And I thought, that's the man. Always striving for the impossible and achieving a lot in the process. So that's Sudeep, and I think we were very lucky. Bengal was very lucky that we could get him, that this book was launched. I shouldn't talk so much, but let me just say something else about Sudeep. Sudeep spent a lot of time here in Bangladesh. He was here for 5 years previously. But the first time I met Sudeep, I have to tell you that. I was in the British Council, and Sudeep was brought in as a visiting poet by the British Council. And I came in late, and then I heard this wonderful poem about Durga Puja, which is still one of my favorite poems by Sudeep. So he knows Bangladesh very well. So I think from all these perspectives, he was just the right choice for Bengal. But the question still remains: how do you get to publish a book on world English poetry from Bangladesh? What are the events that led up to it? So Sudeep, let me start with that open-ended question and ask you. You should. Oh, people can't hear me. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Do you want me to repeat everything? I'm sure you don't. Okay.
Yeah, what's your question?
Question is, how did we get to have this book out? What was the genesis? What were some of the situations behind this?
The genesis of this book was utter chaos, as everything in South Asia tends to be. It was utter love as well, and dedication and trust. I happen to be one of the co-editors of a magazine which I co-founded when I lived in Dhaka, which was from 1999 to 2004, which is 5 solid years in your country. I translated Shamsur Rahman's book, Fazal Shahabuddin's book, wrote a big book on your country called The Postcards from Bangladesh, which is still around, writing a book of literature and photography and making it into a bestseller was impossible to do, but somehow people tend to buy it. They're probably a little blinkered because I have a lot of fondness for them. But how did this happen? So when we were doing the last issue of Six Seasons Review, which you must pick up, it's a wonderful, wonderful literary magazine that publishes poetry, fiction, non-fiction, photography, art, both in English as well as in translation from not only Bangla, but also world languages. I'm used to getting SOSs from my dear friend and editor, Fakrul. Last issue যখন বেরোচ্ছিল তার 2 week আগে he flies an email saying, we need material, we need literary poetry, we need literary fiction, help. So then I reached out to my colleagues and friends, and I just shot off all these emails saying that, we need poetry for this great magazine and so on. Where is it? No, it's not in my country. It's my adopted land, which is my home. So we got a flood of submissions to the point that he wrote back saying we can't fit it into one issue. And then he seeded the idea that why don't we do an anthology? And this is the first world English poetry anthology that's ever come out. We don't have an anthology like this, not even in America or even in Britain. For that to happen in Dhaka gives me real joy and pleasure, because I love the Bangla loving chaos of the way the thing was done. I was given 3 days to put the book, not quite that. Something like that. And then they would send me PDFs at 3 in the morning and say, we need it by office opening time tomorrow morning. As if I'm not a human being. I know you guys were also working. First of all, actually, before I even answer all this, a big, big thank you to Bengal Foundation, Bengal Publication, Zeenat, who's here, who's leading the team, Aumia, Kashfia, and Jahangir Palash.
Since you've been named, could you please stand up?
Can you stand up and be the queen of Bengal? And at which point we... That's the team. That's the team I was working invisibly with lots of beautiful emails, some acerbic emails, some emails written with a heated Bengali passion. But then, because it's a Bengali project, it has to be done that way. And when we, of course, first met, the only thing that happened was lots of warm hugs. So thank you, the three of you, and Palash.
I tell you what, since we've mentioned the book, the production has come in. So perhaps we should first see the book. Let's have the book launch, right? And I would invite Zeenat, who's the managing editor for the Bengal publications, to come in. And, Zeenat and Sudeep can formally unveil the book, and it can be launched that way.
Now, it's been an absolute pleasure to do this book. We've wanted to do a poetry book for a long time, but we've gotten many submissions, but I wanted to do a book that's actually really international standard, and thank you, Mr. Sen, for giving this to us. It's a great honor to be able to do this book and present this book at the Dhaka Literary Festival. And I hope you get your copy. It's at the Bengal Publication stall, and thank you so much. And of course, sorry, none of this would have happened if Professor Alam didn't start this off. So thank you, thank you.
I was, as what they call a sleeping partner. I did almost nothing.
Thank God he didn't sleep with me.
But I'll accept whatever compliments come my way. By the way, Sudeep is the consulting editor for Six Seasons Review, which I edit. And to get back to the book, let me just say how difficult it is to get poetry. I think that Six Seasons Review, we are very lucky. We get good fiction fairly regularly. And I'm proud of the issues that we have done in the second rebirth of Six Seasons Review. But getting poetry is difficult. I didn't know that Niman, for example, wrote poetry. And it's wonderful that Sudeep has managed to include a lot of Bangladeshi poets in the anthology. And it's good to have the Bangladeshi poets be in the same anthology as, would you believe it, Joseph Brodsky, Glenn Maxwell, Keki Darwala, whom I have admired for a long time now, other very famous poets, Vikram Seth, and so on. So I think that one of the wonderful things about literary festivals is that the world will come together, and I think thanks to Sudeep, thanks to Bengal, this is where we've come together.
One of the things I thought I would do when you put an anthology like World English Poetry together, where do you even start? And I've sort of justified myself in the little preface I've written that of course one starts with the poems you know, the poets you know, the poems you admire. So I go back to my library of my grandfather and my grandmother and my parents and so on. Those were the books that influenced me. I'm heavily, whatever I am as an English poet is purely because I know and read Bangla and Hindi. I understand Urdu and I translate from these languages. So my being an English writer is purely possible because these other pillars around me strengthen my palette, strengthen my space, and enriches English in a certain kind of way. One of the things I also wanted to do, I had to take a few critical decisions. Because the book was going to come out in Bangladesh, I said, okay, let me be a little biased and have a few extra Bangladeshi poets who, in the normal scheme of things, I don't know whether they would get in or not. I'm not saying that they're good or bad. The way I edit anthologies usually is, of course, if I admire a person, be that they're my friend or enemy, I will still consider their work. Otherwise, I get my assistant to white out the names and read blind. I only read the text for what it is, and whoever gets in by virtue of the tenacity of text will be in the anthology. And often it's a very unpolitical gathering then, because it doesn't look into things like national boundaries or representation of every country, gender, so on and so forth. I am very aware that one should be doing all that. But to me, if poetry has to survive, only good text can win. And for that, I just felt that that's what should happen. But in this case, I did make two exceptions. Because this book is going to be born here, Bangladeshi poetry has to be in English, has to be showcased. So therefore, in fact, all the contributors from Bangladesh are going to be reading today. Some of them are here, some of them are wandering around getting signatures of Jon Snow because he's obviously a celebrity. But they'll probably come very soon. But the focus today will be how Bangladeshi poetry in English has evolved. Some work has been done in fiction already because more people know about fiction because fiction sells more. So I think the best way to start off is perhaps stop the chatter and get to the poetry. And may I invite Farida Majid to come and read a few of your poems, please? Because you're wearing a beautiful bindi. What else can I say?
Because you'll be very good as a first. This will be very good as a first. And we want to start that way.
But also because I've been a devotee of English poetry in Bangladesh.
Farida, before you start, just to say something about yourself. And I know your glittering past and glittering literary history, a lot of people in Bangladesh don't know. So it'll be good that you talk about Salamander Press and those things and so on.
Well, yes, about English poetry and Bangladesh, because I just happened to be Bangladeshi at that time from 71, since Bangladesh was born. But shortly after that, I found myself to be a publisher of British poetry, English poetry, and I became the publisher and editor of other English poets. And those that I published as almost kind of a one-woman publishing house. And those books got awards, Poetry Book Society recommendation, it got Arts Council funding, and it was amazing. It's unthinkable now to think of those things. And this one-woman publishing house publishing British poetry, first collections of British poets, and which are winning prizes. In the Kit Wright's book won the Geoffrey Faber Memorial Prize. So it was quite an extraordinary thing. But anyway, I also became a panel of judges because of my editorial acumen. I became included in the panel of judges of Commonwealth Poetry Prize. I remember we gave that, of the 2 years that I was there, we gave Arun Kolatkar the prize for poetry. Yes, that was wonderful, and I became actually the deciding voice to give Arun Kolatkar that year, and so then these are the other than, of course, I'm a language teacher. I taught Bangla language and literature at Columbia University, and also I taught English for many years at City University of New York. So this is my I think Sudeep, I sent him other poems, but these are his favorite poems. So it is his choice, really, that he chose this. Shall I?
You can see that she's distancing her from her poems. Don't fall for it.
Anyway, this is a New York City poem. So, and New York City, of course, is kind of a city I grew up in a way. You know, I was undergraduate years, graduate years, and over the years. And being at NYU, Washington Square College, which is where theater, jazz, poetry, everything happened in the village. And I grew up in that. So New York City is a very sort of another home city for me. So this is a New York City poem, and it's called Garbage Truck Blues. Days cry, I'm harsh with them, downright cruel. My mean ears wait secretly for the deep in the dark. That is when garbage truck hauls them away at long last. Don't want to dream, no. But the legacy of the truck is such that I do. Of a forest of tall trees full of blooming orchids of unbearable colors, of red, purple, saffron-winged parrots screeching, splattering, thick green air, of a vine of clematis, bluer than flax in the field of soft sun of the spring I'll never return to. And this is another poem that little few, you know, sometimes you scribble few lines. And again, this is a submission I made, I don't know when. Sudeep picks it up and puts it. This is not my submission, it's Sudeep's selection. This is a New York City poem, An Insomniac's Prayer. And if I fall asleep, if I can, alone, will you forgive my wakeful deprivations and upright me in the morning on my two legs, stick rigid with pride of being alive in emptiness? This is a poem that got mixed up in printing, Sudeep. So it should begin as on a postcard. It's actually, I mean, a postcard, and I scribbled this poem within the space of this postcard. So this postcard is a portrait of H.G. Wells painted by Felix Topolsky. So if you visited Felix Topolsky's studios in Hungerford Road Bridge in London, underneath, and you would have found on the souvenir postcard with portrait of H.G. Wells. H.G. Wells, as you know, is the author of Time Machine. So this is on a postcard with a portrait of H.G. Wells. Shall we, hand, board the time machine to arrive at a chosen future? Let us not. I'd rather stick to this vague dreaming, knowing, though dreams don't come true, vagueness has its own intriguing act of flicking a sequined scented veil. And then, just as you are getting into the swing of heady music, it is tossed away. No one cries, wow, at the newly revealed wrinkles and scars. because by then you've gleaned the overall scheme of the dance, and with the break of daylight, reality is one step closer in all its enchantment.
Thank you, Farida. That's lovely.
Thank you very much. That's very, very beautiful. But now I'd like to ask Niman, Subhan to come. I'd like to say this. Please come up. I wanted to say this before also. Niman, I've known for some time. I actually met her only twice, I think, or thrice. But I feel that I've known her for a long time. Because those of you who've read the Daily Star, for many years, every Friday, she contributed these wonderful columns. And then, when Six Seasons started, she contributed this excellent story, which I urge all of you to read in her collection of short fiction also. Didn't know she was a poet. It's a discovery for me.
Shall I just... You know, Fakrul Bhai, actually my first book, which is a collection of my columns from the Daily Star, and there are 5 or 6 poems included in that. And since I'm going to say a little bit about myself, very shortly. This book was published by UPL, and it's a collection of my columns with some poems. And last year at the Hay, this is a collection of my short stories, and Zeenat knows the story behind it. She's responsible for putting this together, and that's there in the Bengal publication stall. I've lived away. I've lived in Italy for like almost 3 decades, but I've very close touch with my home country, and I'm constantly coming back, and every winter I come. I teach Bengali, actually. I teach Bengali at the University of Rome, La Sapienza, which is not there in the bio. But it's a very important part of what I do, because that keeps me connected to my language, to Bangla also. Sudeep, I know for a long time, in fact, when he was first in Bangladesh. In fact, he was editing an anthology, which I don't think ever saw the light of day. I don't know why. It was a beautiful work. I met him then, and it's been a long association. I deeply admire his work, his poetry. And in fact, tomorrow there's a collection of my own poems, Calligraphy of Wet Leaves, which is coming out, which has been edited by Sudeep as well. So I'm going to read the 3 poems that are in the anthology, are also included in my book. So I'm going to read from that, the short ones. I'll first read 2 poems that kind of reflect the kind of writing I do, whether it's in prose or in verse. Although I write all kinds of poetry, but the places where I've lived, where I've been, affects me, and I've written about them. So one of the 2 poems that Sudeep has picked up, one is called Juliet's House, Verona. And this is the house of the Capulets and the Montagues, which are real houses, real places. What one doesn't really know whether it's known to be where Juliet lived. Juliet's house. It is quite possible she lived elsewhere. No matter, for I did not come to sniff her trail, nor to posture at that faded balcony clogged with the ivy of legend. I came to watch from upstairs windows the crowds of devotees with slung cameras, and to marvel how we expend our allotted pittance of hours in exploring and touching the mottled walls of fables, inventing great spaces of fantasy within the medievalness of our blind faith, medievalness of cramped rooms, and with the tempera of our blind faith, painting love's temple in so meager a house. Crossing the courtyard, I stand before the girlish statue monument to the eternal other, and to our first memory of joy and pain and perfection, as false as the myth of this house, and just as true. The other one is also a place in Rome. This is the baths of Caracalla. These are huge, they were covered, they call the terme, these baths, hot baths, cold baths, places. This is where the Romans used to get together for their political intrigue. They to have the slaves massage them. They would hang around. There's like a gymnasium, and now it's where all the great the operas take place in summer. In fact, the three tenors have performed there. It's a wonderful eerie place. And when you think that even in medieval times, this place was still in ruins, so we know that sense of how old it is. It's called The Singing Stones, Opera Night at the Baths of Caracalla. My cavernous soul sprouts grass, wind tufts choke my gap-toothed walls, jeer at my deafness. But I am not unhearing. I have hoarded the whispers of each age, time's nagging voice. What is a bit of grass or wind? Mere passing of seasons, minor crops, compared to my vast stony harvest, cruel in its knowledge. Footfalls fade, the leaves fall. So bring on the melody, sweeten the blow. It's time for Verdi on moon-drugged nights to drown the dead past. Those brief lives filled with tawdry political gossip among oiled and massaged noblemen. Pour the music into my skull, the myrrh to steaming water, and I shall turn a deaf ear against the airs and arias of this age too. I keep secrets well, lock my invisible doors after the singers and the stragglers leave, and the noisy azalea bushes fall quiet. This is but the overture. I have long centuries to keep before the echoes of all our collective songs reach the ears behind my non-existent roof. And the last one is Wet November. The poem selected in the anthology, It's My Fault, is a slightly older version. It's still fine, but I changed it a little bit. So I'm going to just read the more updated version. The other one is fine as well. Wet November. In fact, this is part of the calligraphy of Wet Leaves, and the title comes from this poem. And I just want to say a little bit about what my book and what since I'm also saying to tell you who we are, what we are at this moment. I think this book and this poem crystallizes for me the point where I am, which is I identify with the fall season, with autumn. Winter is yet to come. The first rain of winter has already taken place, but winter is still far away. It's still beautiful. Well, Wet November. Arrowheads of rain, like rats from a sinking ship, skitter down the slope of my street. Calligraphy of wet leaves, washed up on curbs like scraps of damp newspaper, spells November's arrival. Heavy, smoky waves now heave as if into a lurching vessel. Finally, autumn, brave captain with his ship, sinks into winter's depth. If I may, Sudeep, may I read one poem which is like a parallel piece to this, which is, it's very small.
Not an epic, right?
It's very small. It's called this last October day, because it comes just before November. The snivel in the dripping trees outside my high window pelts on glass panes with nail heads of tears, hammering shut the coffin lid of this lamenting day. The drumming on the rooftop knells the death rattle of the season. Mostly, it is a whimpering moisture, spun so light it hangs on invisible threads, faint as hope, barely falling, till you look down at the slick-tiled courtyard where the simmering drops appear like bubbles boiling from below, as if in nameless joy, death in life. It is all a dance, and it is only my eyes that are blurry, for the keening has stopped, as a steadfast rain with its starburst spittle pinpricks the milky tea puddles, squelches the garden's black molasses earth, and nudges its dense, sweet secret scents, brewed from the knowledge of the merely temporary passing of this last lachrymose October day. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll have Sudeep reading at the end, but I would like to ask a couple of questions before we do that, and then we'll open it up. One of them is that I've just managed to get a copy of the book a few hours ago, but I know about it, and it's truly a world poetry book. So I'd like to ask Sudeep how he managed that. How did he manage to get in so many different countries of the world where people write in English together?
So as I was saying before, that the first space you look at are poems and poets you're familiar with. And then because I've been in this business of editing anthologies, I had recently edited the HarperCollins book of English poetry. So I'd been reading a lot. One of the things I found was, apart from the UK, USA, and perhaps Australia, New Zealand, and Canada maybe, all the other world Englishes are not properly represented in anthologies. And we have brilliant, brilliant writing from Africa in English, from the Caribbean in English, from Fiji, the subcontinent, of course, from the Middle East. There are lots of people writing in English. Russians in this book who write in English. So it's a kind of palette of our time where English is also we are all bifurcated people with English as a strand, which is fairly, fairly important if you need to sort of survive. And many people are expressing themselves in maybe English, maybe two languages, Bangla and English, and many, many, many more. So a Nobel laureate like Joseph Brodsky is in here. I just wanted to have him here, really. I had to fight really hard with his agents to get the permissions free, because his fees are $100 per line. Well, he is a Nobel Prize winner, so I think he can justify that. To have a person like him and a young poet from Bangladesh on the same platform was very, very important for me, because it sort of links the two spaces. I was also looking at the verticality of writing as opposed to the horizontality of writing, which is the breadth. We often try to cover a lot of space, but we don't go into the depth. So for me, when I choose poems here, it speaks to me not just as a poet or an editor, but as a lay person who likes words strung together. So if I'm choosing poems which are not the poet's favorite, clearly, I stand by it, because I think the poems work as objects regardless of the personality behind them. Because we won't have Farida or Neiman with their beautiful voices and delivery and dresses come and recite to all of us. This is lucky. So here, in some ways, our impression about the poetry can get colored because you have baggage, you have visual contact with the person, but I just want the text to win. So it was a lot of various things that came together. And of course, I was trying to, it's no point having Ted Hughes in it because you can get Ted Hughes everywhere. So obviously, a large number of people who are extremely well established are left out. But I felt people like Joseph Brodsky, who largely wrote in Russian, but also in English, because his politics kind of echoed the politics of the communism of that time of Russia and a certain kind of Bengal. It was important for me to have that, and so on.
Okay, I was going to ask a couple of questions, but I'll forego the second one because I think we're running out of time. And I'd like to open it up at one point. So, Sudeep, could you read your poems?
So since the first session, I was thinking of which poems I should pick and read. But what tends to happen in poetry festivals is there's a sense of osmosis. So I think I'm quite colored by the opening sessions today. And a lot of it was about politics and about conflict. This is a poem on Kargil. The last flashpoint between India and Pakistan was in Kargil and the war was fought. And I visited Kargil 10 years after the war. I trek a lot and I translate Tibetan scriptures, so I spend a lot of time in monasteries. And I've spent a lot of time in Ladakh. But one of my trips to Ladakh, I had my young son then with me, and he said, Baba, Kargil jete hobe. He wanted to go to Kargil. And I said, why? And he was at an age where he was playing with his plastic guns and bullets. So I said, fine, because he had this fantasy that if he goes to Kargil, he'll find remnants of warheads. And of course, when we landed up there 10 years later, it was just an ordinary outpost of a town. And at least, strange creatures like poets like us, there's always material for us to write, in spite of our pressures from our youngsters. So this is called Kargil. 10 years on, I came searching for war signs of the past, expecting remnants, magazine debris, unexploded shells, shrapnels that mark bomb wounds. I came looking for ghosts, people passed, skeletons charred, abandoned brick wood cement that once housed them. I could only find whispers among the clamor of a small town outpost in full throttle, everyday chores catching outward signs of normality and life. In that bustle, I spot war lines of a decade ago, though the storylines are kept buried, wrapped in old newsprint. There's order amid uneasiness, the muezzins cry, the monks chant, baritones merging in their separateness. At the bus station, black coughs of exhaust, smoke screens everything. The roads meet, and after the crossroad ritual, diverge, skating along the undotted lines of control. A porous garland with cracked beads adorns Tiger Hill. Beyond the mountains are dark memories, and beyond them, no one knows. And beyond them, no one wants to know. Even the flight of birds that wing over their crests don't know which feathers to down. Chameleon-like, they fly, tracing perfect parabolas. I look up and calculate their exact arc and find instead a flawed theorem. I'll shift tonality. I'm very aware of the time, and we wanted to start on time and end on time because that's very important for South Asians to learn. We can go on and on and on. They love their once they get a mic, they just don't want to leave. So I'm going to change the tonality. This is a different kind of oppression I'm talking about. I come from a country, India, where the erotic was celebrated for so many years. And in the modern times, we have such problematic situation where freedom of speech is taken away and so on. So this is a poem on erotica. If people want to wear veils, then this is the time to do it because it's rather shifty. You might also want a cold glass of water after this. This is called Desire. Eta Bangla onubada hoyeche, eta khub sundar kintu. But they used all the right words, not to offend the locals. And this is part of a series called Erotex, which is 16 movements on erotica. And a wonderful now friend, an American ballet dancer, she took about 8 of these poems and did this beautiful production, very minimalist, just white candles, white flowers. And you would see nothing erotic in the thing. But that's the whole idea. Because if you, erotic writing is a razor edge situation. If you push it too hard, then you enter the peace space. If you undercook it, it becomes soppy, sentimental love poetry, which many of us have written as youngsters. So how do you get the balance? I hope this one does. This is called Desire. Under the soft, translucent linen, the ridges around your nipples harden at the thought of my tongue. You, lying inverted like the letter C, arch yourself deliberately, wanting the warm press of my lips. It's wet to coat the skin that is bristling, burning, breaking into sweats of desire, sweet juices of imagination. But in fact, I haven't even touched you. At least, not yet. And this is an ode to this wonderful tree outside, Bottola. I didn't write the poem because I saw this. I'm very familiar with this tree, having lived here for 5 years. But I also have, in Bakura and in Faridpur, in our ancestral home, a big banyan tree. And this is the banyan tree I'm writing about. I'll end with this poem. And of course, it goes into various other spaces. Banyan. As winter secrets melt with the purple sun, what is revealed is electric. Notes tune unknown scales, syntax alters tongues, terracotta melts white. Banyan ribbons into armatures as branch roots twist, meeting soil in a circle. Circuits glazed under cloth carry alphabets for a calligrapher's nib, italicized in invisible ink, letters never posted, cartographer's map uncharted. As phrases fold, so do veils. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now that Sudeep has read Desire and has got everyone stirred imagination-wise, open the floor up for questions.
How many countries, how many poets did you read through of how many countries before you could select this for this book?
For this book? Well, as I said, I was already in the process of reading a lot because of a couple of other projects, so that's why I could do this book very fast. There are 85 poets in this book, so it's quite voluminous. And the minimum number of poems, no, not really actually. I thought the minimum number of poems per poet would be 3, but we had to chop off 85 pages 2 days before it was going to print. Can you imagine chopping off poets? It was an ISIS-like act. And I feel so guilty. But then, of course, they wouldn't bring me down to Dhaka. Because then they said, we are flying you here and putting you up in a nice place. Nah, I mean, I'm just joking. You don't have to look sheepish. There is a real problem with, length of the books and so on. So then I said, bartered myself down to say 320 pages. Why? Because if you know the printing technology, pharma hai, which is a bastardization of the word format. A format in a sheet of paper can include 16 pages. So 320 pages would be no wastage. And also the size was reduced because printing korte hocche to ekটু বেশি কাগজ যদি সাইডে থাকে, no, we need to reduce the size. So anyway, all that was done, but it's 320 pages of cracking poetry, I think. You heard just 2 of them, and I wish we could include a lot more, but there are 85 poets from all around the world. Many of whom you may not have ever heard of, but they are great names in their own countries. And so I would say that, delve into it, and this is just a taster. It's just the hors d'oeuvres, After that, you pop open the champagne bottles and buy their 10 books, which you must.
Yeah, I just want to add here, I'll take the question, Shafiq, in a minute, but it's only 212 pages and 500 Dhaka. And Bengal is right over there.
Thank you very much. It's just a wonderful session and nice reading of poetry. I would just like to know that we knew that there are many schools of poetry, like modern poetry, postmodern poetry, and now many poets in different parts of the world are producing poetry. So can you name any organized school of poetry at the present time in terms of world poetry? Or is it nationally oriented only?
Can I take the question away from you and ask a question which I wanted to ask you?
Okay, thank you.
When you're doing an anthology like this, how does your own poetic predilections, your own preferences, how do you think they come and help and maybe stand in the way as an anthologist? That's something which interests me.
Yeah, no, these are good questions, and your question is good as well. To answer your question very quickly, there isn't any one school, and we are richer for that. It's a very, very pluralistic, multi-faith kind of situation, which is how the world ought to be, and that's the reality of the world. So there is no one religion, thankfully. All the poets have their own individual private faith, but they all congregate under one church, under the book, with the same prayer, which is peace and harmony and so on and so forth, but really celebrating poetry. But to answer your question, of course, if I'm putting my name down as the editor, I have my own aesthetics. I would not put poems by people I dislike, because that is not the way to do an anthology. There are people in this anthology who are sure enemies on real terms. But I think they write pretty damn good poetry. So I said they deserve their space in it. I also wanted to include a wide variety of styles, because just because we have grown up in the fodder of, say, Keats, Shelley, so on and so forth, or Nazrul or Ghalib and so on, our interest is only that much which we are used to or are informed by. There are so many other traditions and types of poetry which are valid forms which we need to open our eyes to. So there's minimalistic poetry, there's Goddo Kobita, prose poetry, there's SMS poetry. I know people will say, how can you have something like an SMS poetry? But Orange, the phone company Orange in England, the world's most, apart from the Nobel Prize, of course, which every Bengali wants to win here, but Orange has a huge poetry prize, which is worth a lot of pounds, and you have to write a poem in those characters which fits on the screen. And some of the greatest contemporary masters have actually entered that. Only in India and South Asia, the so-called big poets don't enter because they have some sort of false ego around them or aura. But in the general poetry's landscape, a lot of people, participate in that. So yeah, so of course I've put my signature down. My only thing I will say is that the poems written in this book are well-built objects, because ultimately it's a craft. If that is good enough, I'm not interested whether I agree with the poem's politics or not, or whether there should be a shade of blue or green. It's of no concern to me. If the poem can stand on its ground without the poet reading it invisibly, I think then that's when it works on the page.
Right. Any other question?
These are all contemporary poets. Only one person in this book is dead, actually. So they're all living. Some of them are lurking around this place. Thank you very much. Please buy, dozen books at a time because you need to support the questions. Arekta question আছে, বলো।
My question is, it may not be totally relevant to today's discussion.
Try to make it relevant though.
So, that is, in your reading, I hope that you have read a lot many poems written in other languages than English. So, do you find or do you acknowledge any difference in the treatment and choosing of subject matters between the English poets, I mean non-native English poets, and the poets writing in other languages, suppose in writing in Bengali?
I'm afraid this is a question I think that has to be taken later perhaps, and if you want to give a short answer.
No, of course there are differences. When you're writing in different languages, the cadences and the registers, the grammar structure, the tautologies, and all those sorts of mathematical, the scientific end of language is very different. The construction of languages are different. But what unites poetry of various kinds is a poem sings. Banglaয় বলে না কবিতার রস আছে কিনা, the ras. Poetry that way transcends a lot of things. So you need these two qualities, the lyric quality and the sort of inner, sort of osmotic, corpuscle juice that drives you, the blood cells. That's what unites. There are lots of differences, and the differences make it richer. Stylistically, things are different. So if it's your native tongue, then you write in a particular way. If it's a non-native tongue, often it's flawed. Like, say, the early English poetry by the Indians, I find very staccato, very, very stilted, because they were replicating a certain kind of Victorian romantic poetry model, which was not part of Indian speech. But my generation of poets who write in English as an Indian language, because for me, I have 4 mother tongues, Bangla, Hindi, English, and a bit of Urdu. So it's a different time, different space, different rules, and so that's how it works.
All right, thank you, Sudeep. Shall we have last words for the publisher? Zinath, you want to say anything?
No, it's just been an absolute pleasure, like I said earlier before. And poetry is something, literature itself, other than Dhaka Lit Fest, has been a testament to how people enjoy reading. There's an increase in English readership. And other than that, literature itself, more or less, had been on the decline, or so we felt. But like I said, Dhaka Hay Festival and Literary Festival proved otherwise. And poetry in itself is the core of literature, or so I feel, being a student of literature. And it's just been a pleasure. And it was of course, there's been ups and downs and so on, but it's been a pleasure, and we'd like to thank you for doing this, and thank you, Mr. Fakrul Alam, and thank you for the Bengal Publications team as well, and thank you all for being here. So,
thank you for being such a lovely audience. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Happy to sign books. The authors will sign their books, so take advantage.